So we've already talked about creating the pivot tables, but sometimes you actually need to move them to another sheet or somewhere else on the same sheet. As you know, pivot tables are sort of a unique entity and we have to be really careful with them. So let me just show you the best way to do that. You'll notice here in the data that we actually have the pivot table and the data on the same sheet. Now, in general, that is not a best practice. We already talked about the fact that they just work better when they have their own space. So let's say that I just needed to move this to another sheet. I'm going to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and then in the Actions group, you'll notice that I actually have a choice for Move Pivot Table. So that makes it really easy, and Excel's going to do all the work for me. So I'm just going to click on Move Pivot Table, and notice I can either put it on an existing worksheet or a new worksheet. Now we could just create a new one, but I have one called Pivot Table that really doesn't have anything on it. So I'm just going to click on Pivot Table. I'm going to click here in A3. Notice it just types that in as I go, and I choose OK. And it just moved everything, all the formatting. It's exactly the same. When I go back to data, the pivot table is no longer there. So really easy tool, just using the Move Pivot Table. You could do a copy of a pivot table. As you know, we can lay them out all sorts of different ways. So I've gone to a lot of work and maybe I've done some customizing here, and then I decide I really need two based off the same data. I could start from scratch, or I could just go ahead and make a copy of it, and then I would just tweak that second copy. So I'm going to use the select option. Instead of trying to select it myself, we really want to use the select option, and you'll see all the choices that are here. As you know, again, with pivot tables, it's just so many different areas and moving parts. So it's just better if you do it this way. I'm going to do entire pivot table. It selects it. I am going to go ahead and just copy it. I'm going to go to a new sheet, and then I'm just going to paste it there. Now these are independent. They do both go back to the original data source, but one is not related to the other. They're just two separate pivot tables. So now, if I make a change to this one and I just change the layout, let's say I swap region and take off products, you'll notice that does not affect the other pivot table. So they're two independent pivot tables. And then if I decided I didn't want one anymore, again, what I'm going to do, instead of trying to select it myself, I'll just let Excel do that. I'll go back to Select. I'm going to go back to Entire Pivot Table. And I'm just going to use my Delete key. Now, you will notice that there's a clear option here. I'll point that out to you, but that's really not what I want. If I clear all, it just lets me restart, but notice I still have a pivot table. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm just going to use the Delete key on my keyboard, and now the pivot table is completely gone. So if you need to move, copy, or delete the pivot table, those are the best ways to do it.